On the day she believed love and peace would finally return to her life, Naomi discovered a betrayal so deep. It cut straight through her soul. At 66, she had given nearly 5 decades of loyalty to Patrick, her husband. She thought the divorce would free her from years of silence and distance, but unseen hands had prepared a crueler blow. Hidden beneath polished papers and calm smiles, a conspiracy was unfolding. Her daughter-in-law Clara and her husband Patrick had been weaving their deception in secret, plotting not only to discard her, but to strip her of the very home she had built. Clara was the young wife of Naomi's only son, Kelvin. Where are you watching from today? Kindly hit like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more. To family and neighbors, Clara appeared perfect, devoted, graceful, and respectful. She laughed at Naomi's jokes, praised her cooking, and played the part of a dutiful daughter-in-law. Yet behind closed doors, her heart belonged elsewhere. She had entangled herself with Patrick, the very man who had once vowed to love Naomi forever. Their affair was carefully hidden in quiet corners and stolen meetings. Naomi was blind to it, until one visit from Clara's older sister Ruth revealed the truth. It began innocently, with Ruth knocking on Naomi's door one warm afternoon in Brightgate Town. Naomi welcomed her in, the dining table neatly set with cream linen, cucumber sandwiches, and a lemon cake still warm from the oven. Ruth's hands shook as she set down her purse, her eyes red as if she had been weeping all morning. "Naomi," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I have something to tell you, and it may destroy everything you know." Naomi's heart skipped. The cozy dining room, lined with family photos and flowers, suddenly felt like a stage where dark secrets could no longer hide. Ruth's confession dropped like thunder. Clara and Patrick. They are together. Naomi's breath caught, her world tilting. Her husband of 44 years, father of her son, caught in an affair with his own daughter-in-law? Ruth's voice trembled as she described seeing them at a cafe near Crownwell Enterprises, Patrick's office. She had watched their hands locked together, their lips brushing as if no shame existed. Naomi sat still, her face calm though her chest burned. She asked again, "Are you certain?" Ruth nodded. Clara had mocked her openly, calling Naomi too old, too dull, and vowing Patrick deserved someone better. Naomi rose and walked to the window where roses glowed in the afternoon sun, red petals shining against their green leaves. Her body was steady, but her heart ached like breaking glass. She did not scream. She did not collapse. Instead, she whispered words Ruth could scarcely believe. "I will do nothing." Ruth gasped. "Nothing. But she is destroying you." Naomi turned back with a faint smile, her eyes calm but dangerous. "My dear, some battles are not won with rage. Sometimes the cleverest move is to let your enemies believe they have already won, until pride itself becomes their trap." That night when Patrick came home, Naomi served his favorite meal, roasted chicken with yams and vegetables, just as she had done every Friday for decades. He smiled faintly, pretending nothing was wrong, but Naomi saw the shadows in his eyes. He checked his phone constantly, smoothed his shirt with nervous hands, and avoided her gaze. "Long day at Crownwell Enterprises?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. "Yes, very long," he muttered, retreating into his study. Naomi watched him go, her mind sharper than ever. She had confirmed Ruth's story. Now she would play along, patient, observant, waiting for her moment. 3 days later, Clara arrived for Sunday dinner, sweeping into Naomi's home in a new red dress that shimmered under the lights. She kissed Naomi's cheek with exaggerated warmth, her perfume filling the air. "Naomi, you look wonderful," she said sweetly, though her eyes glowed with hidden pride. Naomi smiled back, masking her thoughts. She poured Clara a glass of wine and listened as she spoke of vacations and investments. But Naomi noticed every detail: the flush on Clara's cheeks when Patrick entered, the long glance they shared across the table, and the whispered conversations whenever they thought no one noticed. Kelvin arrived late, apologizing for traffic, his face tired from long hours at his job in Citibank. He sat beside Clara, unaware of her shifting loyalties. Naomi's heart ached for her son, who still looked at his wife with love and trust. Meanwhile, Clara leaned closer to Patrick, her laughter too loud, her smiles too bright whenever he spoke. Naomi cut her roast beef with steady hands, watching the silent play unfold around her table. Every glance, every gesture told a story of betrayal, but Kelvin saw none of it. He believed in love. Naomi, however, believed in evidence. That evening, Naomi made an appointment with a lawyer of her own, one Patrick did not know. She visited Patricia Chaik, a sharp attorney in her 40s with a reputation for winning the most difficult cases. Sitting across from her in a modest office, Naomi revealed the truth. Patricia listened carefully, her eyes narrowing as Naomi laid out her suspicions. "Mrs. Naomi," Patricia said, "your family trust has unique protections. If you can prove infidelity, Patrick will lose all rights to the estate, including your family home and properties." Naomi's pulse quickened. For the first time in weeks, hope stirred. The trust had been written decades earlier by Naomi's late grandfather, a man who believed strongly in bloodline legacy. Patricia explained the clauses. If a marriage ended because of adultery, the guilty party forfeited all rights to properties tied to the trust. "Patrick likely has no idea these clauses exist," Patricia said firmly. Naomi nodded. For years, Patrick believed he was entitled to half of everything. But the truth was clear. He had no claim. Naomi left the office with a quiet smile. Clara and Patrick thought they were outsmarting her. They had no idea she was holding the key. That night, Naomi returned home to find Patrick unusually cheerful. He complimented her cooking, asked about her day, and even brought flowers, pretending to be the husband she once knew. Naomi played along, her smile warm, her words soft. But as she watched him eat, she saw the cracks in his mask, the guilt flickering in his eyes, the restless tapping of his fingers. She wondered if Clara had told him to act more attentive, to lower her suspicions. So, it was already too late. Naomi had seen the truth, and she had a lawyer who knew exactly how to fight. The following week, Patrick suggested they meet his friend Richard, a wealthy lawyer at Petros and Company, to finalize their amicable divorce. Naomi agreed without hesitation. She walked into the grand office, where mahogany tables and leather chairs spoke of wealth and intimidation. Richard smiled politely, sliding a folder toward her. Inside, the settlement was laughable. Patrick would take the house, the business, and most investments. Naomi would be left with a small apartment and modest alimony. "It's fair," Richard said smoothly. Naomi closed the folder gently, hiding her anger. "Where do I sign?" she asked, her calmness rattling Patrick deeply. Kelvin sat at the far end of the table, watching the process unfold. He looked uneasy, his hands clasped tightly together. Clara squeezed his arm, pretending to comfort him, though her eyes glittered with triumph. Patrick leaned back, confident that victory was his. Richard smirked, believing Naomi had surrendered without a fight. Naomi signed her name slowly, deliberately, her pen strokes steady. "I hope this gives you everything you've been seeking," she said softly, looking straight at Patrick. He forced a smile, but unease flashed across his face. Something in Naomi's calmness unsettled him. He sensed she knew more than he thought. Outside, Clara whispered to Kelvin about helping Naomi pack, even suggesting a retirement community for her. "It will be easier for everyone," she said sweetly, her hand clinging to his. Naomi overheard but did not react. Instead, she hugged her son tightly and told him everything would be fine. In her mind, she was already preparing her next move. She would let Clara and Patrick celebrate their false victory. She would let them dream of taking the house and fortune. And then, when the divorce was finalized, the trust would rise like a shield, stripping them of everything they desired. 2 weeks later, Naomi was pruning her roses when Kelvin arrived unexpectedly. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his face pale, his hands trembling. "Mother," he whispered, collapsing onto the steps. "Clara, she has been lying to me." Naomi set down her shears, her heart heavy but steady. She guided him inside, poured water and waited. Slowly, Kelvin revealed the truth. He had discovered messages between Clara and Patrick. Hundreds of them, filled with schemes and mockery. "They laughed at us," Kelvin said bitterly. Naomi placed her hand on his shoulder. "Then, my son, it is time you know everything too." Naomi sat Kelvin down at the dining table and poured him a cup of tea. His hands trembled as he lifted it, eyes clouded with disbelief. "She mocked me, mother," he whispered. "She said I was foolish, that father could give her more than I ever could." Naomi's heart broke, but her voice was steady. "Kelvin, you must understand, this was never about love. Clara saw wealth, not family." He looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. "How long have you known?" Naomi sighed. "Long enough, my son. I kept silent because some battles require patience. Now the time has come." She told him everything. Ruth's warning, the Sunday dinners, the secret glances, the meeting with Patricia Chaik, and the powerful clauses of the trust. Kelvin listened in stunned silence, his knuckles tightening around his teacup. "So all this time," he whispered, "you let them believe they had already won?" Naomi nodded, her eyes glinting with quiet strength. "Yes, and because of that they revealed their true selves. Pride blinds the wicked." Kelvin leaned back, overwhelmed. For the first time, he saw his mother not as a fragile woman abandoned by her husband, but as a strategist, calm and unshaken. The very next day, Ruth visited again, her face pale with worry. She confessed to Naomi and Kelvin that Clara had been boasting about her plans to friends. She said once the divorce is final, she will live in the house as if it were her own, Ruth revealed. Kelvin clenched his fists. "She has no shame." Naomi placed a hand on his arm. "Let her boast. The louder she speaks, the clearer her guilt." Ruth's eyes softened. "Naomi, you've shown strength I never imagined. But please, promise me you won't let this destroy you." Naomi smiled gently. "My dear, it won't." That evening, Patrick returned home whistling, unusually cheerful. He poured himself a glass of wine, bragging about new plans for Crownwell Enterprises. Naomi watched quietly, her eyes unreadable. "Naomi," he said suddenly, "maybe we can find peace after this. Maybe we can even remain friends." She smiled faintly. "Friends, Patrick? After 44 years of marriage and betrayal?" His face stiffened, and he muttered something about moving forward. Naomi excused herself to the garden. There, under the moonlight, she whispered a vow. When the time came, she would not only protect her legacy but ensure Clara and Patrick tasted defeat. The storm broke sooner than expected. A week later, Kelvin confronted Clara after finding another series of messages between her and Patrick. She did not deny it. Instead, she laughed coldly. "Did you really think I married you for love? Patrick is powerful. You are weak." Kelvin's heart shattered, but his anger burned. He threw her belongings into bags and ordered her out of his home. Clara sneered as she left. "It doesn't matter. Soon I will be living in Naomi's house with Patrick. You cannot stop us." Kelvin watched her go, his hands trembling, but determination now in his eyes. He returned to his mother that same night, his voice raw with grief. "She admitted it openly, mother. She said she never loved me." Naomi embraced him tightly, feeling his body shake. "You did not fail, Kelvin," she said softly. "She failed herself. She chose greed over family." Ruth, who had been visiting again, placed a comforting hand on Kelvin's arm. "You deserve better than her," she whispered. Their eyes met, and for a moment a new bond sparked, born not of desire but of shared wounds. Naomi saw it and silently prayed her son would one day find true healing. Days later, Naomi received a furious phone call from Patrick. His voice cracked with rage. "Naomi, you tricked me. Richard just called. There is a problem with the house. Something about your grandfather's trust." Naomi sipped her tea calmly, listening to his panic. Yes, Patrick. It seems you forgot the house never belonged to you. It was always in trust for my bloodline. There was silence, then a broken whisper. You knew, all along. Naomi's voice hardened. Yes. And now, because of your adultery, you forfeited any right to it. Patrick's voice fell to pleading. But Naomi had no pity left. Meanwhile, Clara's desperation grew. She began threatening Naomi directly, arriving at the house with furious words. You think you're clever, old woman? You think this house will stay yours? I know secrets that can ruin you. Naomi remained calm, staring at her with steady eyes. The only secrets being destroyed, Clara, are yours. Clara's rage turned violent. She lunged forward, but Kelvin stepped between them, his face blazing with fury. Leave, Clara. You are not welcome here again. For the first time, Clara faltered, shaken by the strength in Kelvin's voice. She stormed away, but her threats hung in the air. That same week, Ruth uncovered even darker truths. Hidden in Clara's belongings were insurance documents Naomi had never signed, policies forged with Clara listed as the beneficiary. She planned far worse than we thought, Ruth whispered in horror. Kelvin's face turned pale, his hands trembling. Naomi studied the papers calmly. Then the police must see this, she said firmly. They contacted Detective Bacco, who opened an investigation. Clara's greed was no longer just betrayal, it was criminal. Naomi realized her enemy was not merely a liar but a predator. And predators, once exposed to the light, always fall into their own traps. The following Sunday, Patrick and Clara returned together, this time with a moving truck idling outside. Clara screamed from the driveway, demanding the movers unload into Naomi's home. This is my house now, she shouted, her voice cracking with rage. From the window, Naomi watched in silence, her expression unreadable. Kelvin stood tall on the porch, Ruth at his side. His voice carried with unshakable resolve. This is not your house, Clara. And it never will be. Patrick looked weary, defeated. But Clara raged like a storm. In that moment, the final battle for Naomi's legacy truly began. The movers hesitated, looking between Clara's shrill commands and Kelvin's firm stance. Unload the truck. Clara screamed, her eyes wild. But Kelvin raised his voice with steady power. Touch a single box, and I'll call the police. This property is protected by trust law, and you have no right here. The men exchanged uncertain glances, unwilling to get caught in family war. Patrick rubbed his forehead, exhausted, muttering, Clara, enough. It's over. But Clara spun on him in fury. Over. After everything we planned. No, Patrick. We take this house. Her words carried desperation, but also the sound of defeat. Naomi finally stepped outside, her posture regal, her voice calm but sharp. Clara, this house was never yours, and it never will be. The law has spoken. Clara's eyes burned as she pointed a trembling finger. You may think you've won, Naomi, but I know things. Secrets that could destroy you. Naomi met her gaze steadily. The only secrets that crumble are the ones built on lies. And yours are collapsing. For a moment, Clara looked shaken, her face pale against the sunlight. Even the neighbors who had gathered at the street edge whispered among themselves, watching her pride unravel. That evening, Kelvin sat in Naomi's living room, his face heavy with thought. Mother, I feel ashamed, he admitted quietly. I was blind to Clara's games. Naomi shook her head, her hand resting on his shoulder. No, my son. Trust is never shameful. Deceit is the burden of those who betray. Ruth, seated nearby, added gently. Clara used your love against you. But you still have dignity, and that cannot be stolen. Kelvin looked at her, their eyes locking in a moment of warmth. Naomi noticed the spark and allowed herself a small smile. Even betrayal sometimes birthed new beginnings. Days later, Detective Bacco arrived with firm news. He had gathered evidence of Clara's forged insurance policies and her secret dealings with a private investigator. "We will be pressing charges," he said. "Fraud, forgery, and conspiracy." Naomi listened silently, her heart steady. Clara's greed had finally crossed into crime. Kelvin clenched his fists. "She wanted to ruin us all." Detective Bacco nodded grimly. "Predators like her leave trails. She thought she was clever, but she left evidence everywhere." Naomi felt both sadness and relief. Clara's downfall would not just be a family matter now. It would be written in law. Patrick, however, seemed a shadow of himself. He returned late one night, his clothes wrinkled, his voice trembling. "Naomi, I made a mistake." His eyes were hollow, filled with regret. Naomi looked at him coolly. "Mistakes are forgetting an anniversary, Patrick. What you did was betrayal." He fell to his knees, pleading, "I've lost everything. Clara is spiraling. Please let me come back home." Naomi shook her head. "This home is no longer yours. You chose greed, and now you must live with its cost." Patrick bowed his head, broken. Naomi turned away, knowing forgiveness could not rebuild shattered trust. Meanwhile, Clara's fury only deepened. She sent threatening letters, claiming she would reveal hidden truths about the Morrison family. Naomi calmly handed them to Detective Bacco, who added harassment to the growing charges. "Her desperation is showing," he remarked. Ruth sighed. "Clara will not stop until she destroys herself completely." Kelvin looked at his aunt with quiet determination. "Then let her destroy herself. We will not let her destroy us." Naomi watched her son, pride swelling in her chest. At last, Kelvin was no longer blinded by false love. He had found strength through pain, guided by hard truth. Weeks passed, and Brightgate town buzzed with whispers. Neighbors who once admired Clara now spoke of her greed with disgust. Women shook their heads in pity. Men muttered about her disgrace. Naomi walked through the marketplace with her head high, receiving nods of respect. One woman whispered, "She is a true matriarch, strong like the women of old." Naomi smiled faintly, not out of pride but gratitude. She had endured humiliation, betrayal, and threats, yet she stood unbroken. Clara had sought to tear her down, but instead, Naomi's dignity had become her greatest armor. Her story was now her shield. One afternoon, Ruth visited with documents in hand. She had uncovered even more evidence of Clara's schemes, including notes about Naomi's daily routines and medical records, all obtained through the private investigator. "She studied you like prey," Ruth said bitterly. Naomi's expression remained calm. "Then she will learn what happens when prey becomes lioness." Kelvin's eyes darkened with anger. "I want to see her punished for everything." Naomi shook her head. "Let justice take its course, my son. Our role is to protect our legacy, not to waste our souls on vengeance." Her wisdom anchored them both in strength. The day of Clara's arrest came suddenly. Police cars rolled into Brightgate town, their sirens silenced but their presence loud. Neighbors gathered as officers escorted Clara in handcuffs, her once perfect appearance disheveled. She screamed at Naomi's gate, "This isn't over. You'll regret this." Naomi watched from her porch, her face calm, her voice soft. "It has been over for a long time, Clara. You just refused to see it." Patrick stood nearby, his shoulders slumped, watching the woman he had chosen collapse into disgrace. The movers of that day were gone. Now it was the law that carried Clara away. That night, the house was quiet. Naomi sat at the table with Kelvin and Ruth, a lamp casting warm light on their faces. "Mother," Kelvin said softly, "I thought I lost everything. But somehow I feel stronger now." Ruth nodded, her hand resting lightly on his. "Sometimes betrayal clears the path for truth." Naomi lifted her glass of water. "This family has faced storms before, and we will face more. But we remain standing because our roots are deep." Outside, the roses swayed in the night wind. Betrayal had bruised them, but like Naomi, they would bloom again in time. The weeks that followed were filled with whispers of the upcoming trial. Brightgate Town had never seen such scandal, an affair between a husband and his daughter-in-law, followed by fraud and betrayal. Naomi moved with calm dignity, refusing to let gossip disturb her. Patrick, however, was a ghost of himself. He avoided the marketplace, hid from neighbors, and wandered aimlessly at Crownwell Enterprises until the board quietly forced him out. Kelvin watched his father's decline with mixed emotions, pity, anger, and disappointment. Naomi reminded him, gently, "Your father made his choices. We cannot carry his shame, but we can carry our strength." One evening, Detective Bucko visited Naomi's home with new developments. "Clara's case is strong," he explained. "We have the forged policies, the investigators' reports, and even evidence of her threats. She faces years in prison." Kelvin asked, his voice low. "And my father?" Bucko hesitated. "He cooperated with some of her schemes, though less directly. He may face reduced charges if he testifies against her." Naomi folded her hands calmly. "Then let him speak the truth. At least once, he should stand on the right side." Bucko nodded, impressed by her composure. Justice was moving slowly, but it was moving. On the morning of Clara's first court appearance, crowds gathered outside the courthouse. Reporters jostled with cameras, eager to capture every angle of the fall from grace. Clara stepped out of a police van in handcuffs, her once stylish clothes wrinkled, her face hard with fury. She spotted Naomi across the crowd and screamed, "This isn't justice. It's revenge." Naomi stood tall, her simple attire glowing with dignity. She replied calmly, "No, Clara. This is consequence." The crowd murmured, some with pity, most with disdain. In that moment the masks were gone. Clara was no longer admired. She was exposed for who she was. Inside the courtroom, Kelvin sat beside Ruth, his hands tightly clasped. Naomi sat behind them, her presence a silent pillar of strength. Clara's lawyer argued desperately, claiming she had been manipulated by Patrick. But Patrick, summoned as a witness, looked weary and broken. His voice cracked as he admitted to the affair and their plans. "It was wrong," he said, tears filling his eyes. Clara glared at him with venom, but Patrick could no longer defend her. Kelvin lowered his head in shame, while Ruth gently touched his arm. Naomi watched in silence, knowing the truth was finally spilling into light. When Clara's forged insurance documents were presented, the courtroom fell silent. Her signature of Naomi's name was clear, her intent undeniable. The judge's voice grew stern. "This is not merely betrayal, it is calculated fraud." Clara shifted uneasily, but her arrogance remained. "I only wanted what I deserved," she cried. Naomi leaned toward Ruth and whispered, "Greed always thinks it deserves more." Kelvin swallowed hard, realizing how close his family had come to ruin. For Naomi it was not victory she felt, but relief. The house, the legacy, her dignity, all had been preserved, not through anger, but through patience and wisdom. After the session ended, Naomi stepped outside into the bright sunlight. People crowded around, some offering comfort, others admiration. "You have shown strength like our mothers before us," one woman said warmly. Naomi smiled politely, though her heart carried both weariness and peace. Ruth walked beside her, steady and supportive, while Kelvin followed silently, lost in thought. Across the street, Patrick stood alone, his eyes hollow. For a brief moment their eyes met. Naomi saw no husband left in him, only a man consumed by regret. She turned away, reminding herself that her story was no longer tied to his downfall. That evening, Ruth and Kelvin joined Naomi for dinner. The table that once carried secrets now carried laughter, though soft and hesitant. Ruth shared stories from her work at Unity Hospital, speaking gently to distract Kelvin from his pain. Naomi observed quietly, noticing the way Kelvin's face softened when Ruth spoke, the way his shoulders relaxed. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel hopeful. Betrayal had cut deep, but love, in its purest, most honest form, was beginning to grow again. Naomi whispered to herself, "The garden blooms again after storms. So too does the heart." Weeks later, Brightgate Town buzzed with news that Clara had been formally convicted of fraud and forgery. Sentenced to several years in prison, she left the courtroom screaming, her pride still unbroken but her power gone. Patrick, facing smaller charges, received a lighter sentence but emerged a ruined man. He wandered the streets alone, his name whispered with pity and scorn. Naomi, however, stood tall. She had endured betrayal and humiliation, yet she remained whole. When asked by neighbors how she stayed strong, she replied simply, "Because truth never rots. Lies may shine for a season, but they decay in time." Kelvin began to heal slowly. With Ruth by his side, he found comfort in honesty and kindness. One evening, as they walked through Naomi's rose garden, Kelvin stopped. "I thought love was gone from me forever," he said quietly. Ruth smiled, her hand brushing his. "Sometimes love doesn't appear the way we expect. Sometimes it hides until pain clears our eyes." Naomi watched from the porch, tears softening her vision. Her son, once broken, was finding his way again. The betrayal had nearly destroyed them, but in its ashes something real, something pure was taking root. Naomi stood at her window late one night, looking out at the oak tree Patrick had planted with her decades earlier. Its branches swayed in the moonlight, scarred by storms but still standing. "So am I," she whispered. She thought of her grandmother, her mother, and the long line of women before her. Keepers of legacy, protectors of family. Clara had tried to break that chain, but had only strengthened it. Naomi smiled softly. Tomorrow she would begin a new project, turning the small apartment from the divorce settlement into a refuge for women rebuilding after betrayal. Her pain had become purpose. Naomi's vision for the apartment quickly grew. With Patricia Chike's guidance, she registered it as Haven House, a quiet refuge for women leaving broken marriages or escaping betrayal. The neighbors were astonished. What was meant to be Naomi's consolation prize had become a beacon of hope. "Clara thought she was taking everything," Naomi explained to one visitor, "but instead she gave me the foundation to help others." Word spread through Brightgate Town, and soon women arrived at Haven House, grateful for the chance to start fresh. Naomi realized her story was no longer just survival, it was a gift to others. Meanwhile, Patrick struggled in silence. Shunned by colleagues at Crownwell Enterprises and abandoned by Clara, he became a shadow wandering the streets. One afternoon he appeared at Naomi's gate, his clothes rumpled, his face drawn. "Naomi," he pleaded, "let me come home. I have nothing left." Naomi looked at him with calm sorrow. "Patrick, this was once your home. But you burned it with your choices. You must find your own path now." His eyes filled with tears, but she turned away. Love may forgive, but betrayal once chosen could not be undone. For Patrick, regret was the only companion left. Clara's time in prison began with arrogance. She strutted on the first day, declaring she would find a way out. But months passed, and the walls closed in. Her letters to Patrick went unanswered, her so-called friends vanished, and her beauty no longer brought power. When word reached Naomi that Clara had been begging guards for favors, Naomi simply said, "Pride starves when no one feeds it." The same woman who once sought to control everything now struggled for survival. Brightgate Town stopped speaking her name with envy. Now it was only with pity, as a cautionary tale for the proud. Kelvin's healing was steady. He poured his heart into his work at Citibank, and with Ruth's gentle encouragement, he began to laugh again. One evening, as they sat under Naomi's rose arch, he said softly, "I see now, Mother. Love is not about appearances, wealth, or power. It is about trust." Ruth's eyes glistened with quiet affection. Naomi smiled, her heart swelling. "Yes, my son. True love is not noisy. It is steady, like roots beneath the soil. Clara had once poisoned those roots with greed. Now Naomi saw new blossoms, Kelvin's life slowly blooming again, nurtured by truth and loyalty. Months later, Brightgate Town gathered for the grand opening of Haven House. Naomi stood before a small crowd, her voice clear and warm. This place is not built from bitterness, but from renewal. Betrayal tried to break me, but instead it gave me strength. And that strength, I now pass on to others. Applause filled the air. Women wept quietly, inspired by her resilience. Even men nodded with respect, whispering, "She is a matriarch indeed." Ruth and Kelvin stood proudly at her side, their presence a reminder that family was not only preserved, it was restored stronger than before. Detective Bacco attended too, offering quiet congratulations. "Mrs. Naomi," he said, "you taught this town that justice is not only in the courtroom, but in how we rise after betrayal." Naomi thanked him warmly, grateful for his unwavering support. As the evening ended, she walked through Haven House, touching each freshly painted wall. She imagined the women who would sleep there, safe for the first time in years. Clara had once mocked Naomi as too old, too boring. Now, Naomi was building legacies that would outlive even Clara's memory. Pain had been transformed into a lasting heritage of hope. The next season brought another transformation. Kelvin and Ruth, once bound by sorrow, now stood hand in hand with joy. They announced their engagement in Naomi's garden, under the same oak tree Patrick had planted decades earlier. Neighbors cheered, women ululated, and Naomi's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "From ashes, beauty rises," she whispered to herself. The betrayal that once threatened to destroy her family had, in a strange way, cleared the ground for new love to bloom. For the first time in years, Naomi's home was filled not with secrets, but with laughter, honesty, and genuine hope. Patrick did not attend the celebration. Rumors spread that he had moved to another town, taking small jobs to survive. Naomi felt no joy in his downfall, only a quiet sadness. Yet she reminded herself, every man eats the harvest of his choices. Clara, still locked away, sent bitter letters that never reached Kelvin. Ruth intercepted them, shielding him from fresh wounds. Naomi burned the letters quietly in the fireplace, watching the smoke rise. "Let ashes remain ashes," she murmured. Her heart was light. The past no longer held her captive. It was now only a story, not a prison. The wedding was small but beautiful. Naomi walked with Ruth to the altar, blessing her as both daughter-in-law and daughter of her heart. Kelvin's eyes glistened as he took Ruth's hand, his voice steady as he vowed loyalty and truth. Naomi felt her spirit soar. Clara had once tried to poison their family tree, but instead the branches had grown stronger, reaching for the sky. As the couple kissed, applause erupted, and Naomi whispered a prayer of gratitude. Love had been restored, not in the false glow of greed, but in the quiet, lasting fire of sincerity. The garden truly bloomed again. Months after the wedding, Naomi visited Haven House often. She listened to women tell their stories. Some betrayed, some abandoned, some silenced for years. She offered them tea, advice, and a listening ear. "You are not broken," she reminded them. "You are seeds. And seeds only bloom after being buried." Many wept, thanking her for hope. Naomi smiled softly. Clara had tried to bury her with deceit, but instead she had bloomed. Now Naomi was helping others bloom too. What had once been her greatest humiliation had become the cornerstone of her greatest purpose. This was her true victory. One quiet afternoon, Naomi sat under the oak tree, writing in her journal. She reflected on the journey. 44 years of marriage, betrayal, disgrace, and rebirth. "I once thought my life was ending," she wrote. "But life is not about what is taken. It is about what you choose to build from what remains." She closed the journal, placing it on the table beside her. The house was peaceful, birds singing, roses swaying. For the first time in a long while, Naomi felt whole, not as Patrick's wife, not as Clara's victim, but as herself, a woman of resilience and purpose. News of Clara's fate trickled back. She had grown bitter in prison, refusing to change. But Naomi no longer cared. Clara's story was no longer part of hers. Patrick remained distant, wandering like a man without roots. Yet Naomi prayed quietly for him. "Even fallen trees deserve rain," she whispered. Forgiveness had come, not reconciliation but release. She bore no hatred, only wisdom. Life had shown her that those who betray themselves with greed always fall, but those who stand in truth rise again, stronger than before. Naomi chose not to look back. Her eyes were fixed only on tomorrow. As the years passed, Haven House flourished. More women came, more lives were restored. Naomi became a quiet legend in Brightgate Town, respected by young and old alike. Children greeted her warmly, women sought her counsel, and men admired her strength. One neighbor remarked, "She is like the oak tree in her garden, scarred by storms but still standing tall." Naomi accepted the compliment humbly, always reminding others that her strength came from patience, wisdom, and faith. She had been tested in fire, and though scarred, she emerged shining. Her story was no longer about betrayal, it was about triumph. On her 70th birthday, Naomi gathered her family and friends in her garden. Ruth and Kelvin stood proudly beside her, now with a baby in their arms. Naomi held the child tenderly, tears filling her eyes. "This," she whispered, "is why I fought." The oak tree swayed behind them, the roses glowed brightly, and the house stood as a testament to endurance. Clara and Patrick were gone, their shadows erased. In their place stood a family renewed, honest, loving, and strong. As the sun set, Naomi raised her glass and declared, "We are survivors, not victims. And we will always bloom again." That night, Naomi sat by her window, gazing at the moonlit garden. Her journey had been long, filled with heartbreak and betrayal, but it had ended with hope and legacy. She touched her wedding ring, long kept in a box, and placed it back gently. "Forever and always ended," she whispered, "but dignity remains." She thought of the women at Haven House, of Kelvin and Ruth, of the child who would grow under the shade of her oak tree. She smiled softly, knowing her story was no longer one of loss, but of victory. And with that, she rested in peace.